Across Nigeria and the African continent, rich traditions and vibrant cultures have shaped generations. But in a changing world today, are we at risk of losing our wonderful traditions? How do we preserve these invaluable legacies that were handed down to us? Arise analyst Constance Ikoku explores the stories, art and voices keeping Africa's cultural heritage alive for future generations.
Culture is the soul of a people. It defines who we are, where we come from, and how we connect with our past and future. But in a rapidly modernizing world, are we at risk of losing our cultural identity? In the heart of Nigeria today, it seems our culture lives in our music, dance, art, language, traditions. Welcome to Abuja Art and Craft Market, a place that's like a cornerstone of who we are, with different pieces that reflect traditions. Take these masks for instance. Some of them tell stories of our ancestors, their wisdom, and their struggles. Without them, how will the next generation know who they are? We also have handmade baskets. These artisans take their time to beautifully weave these raffia containers with materials that are locally sourced. And who can forget the famed tie and dye fabric, produced with a variety of local techniques, including folding, twisting, and tying fabric with raffia or rubber bands. Across this market, many pieces tell our stories. The question again is, with modernization sweeping through, are we losing touch with our roots? And how can we guard against this? Let's find out. We're attending an event titled Consumption by Moonlight. It's a representation of the popular Tales by Moonlight that takes place in a village setting, featuring folk tales under the moonlight. Only this time we're in an urban setting, specifically Abuja. There's live music, spoken word,
Pride, representing strength, beauty within the community.
and other artists performing to a live audience. What's the purpose of this gathering?
Here in Abuja, what we've tried to do for the past 8 years is to still create that same communal atmosphere where communities come down together and they share storytelling, music, play games, and try to interact with one another in a very communal setting. We're trying to preserve our communities. Africa cultural space is one that is usually transferred through storytelling, sharing stories, and that's what we're doing.
This objective of keeping traditions alive is not only shared by Nigerians. Dennis Macklin is a Ghanaian. He's the manager of the venue where this event is taking place. He strongly believes in Africa and what we have to offer to the world.
We have different people from different backgrounds, different nationalities, so it's okay to advertise or showcase Africa. So bringing this thing up, yes, I think is a good idea. Preserving African culture, we are losing it. It's because, of course, the younger ones, we are adapting to different cultures, but it's important that the ones that are coming up, we preserve African culture and let them know the real meaning of Africa, who Africans we are. So it's important to exhibit this.
Dennis speaks 4 Ghanaian languages. He shares a few words in his native tongue.
Enti minuanom akamfo me Ghanani and try say be introduce Ghana culture, African culture in Nigeria ha.
One of the artists goes down memory lane to tell us how stories shared by his grandfather impacted his life.
I
grew up with my grandfather telling me stories, good stories under the mango tree. I understand the importance of culture and I understand the importance of storytelling.
Mango tree in which state?
Well, in Ikorodu, that was in early 90s. So I experienced the old school, and now I'm experiencing the new school also. So I'm of that breed. And anywhere they talk about culture, anywhere they talk about music that brings out culture, you always find me there.
We live in modern times, in a sort of schizophrenic reality of the old and the new. How do we survive it?
See a lot of Yoruba songs, old good Yoruba songs that I feel that are going extinct. I bring my knowledge of jazz music. I interpret these Yoruba songs. There's a story of Ijapa, that's the tortoise, and Aja the dog. I remember that story from my grandfather. He says, Aja the road, but by the time you hear our interpretation, bringing the new style into this kind of music, it preserves those songs. I feel so one of the things we can do is we check out materials, all these old materials, and breathing new life into them, and we keep them for eternity.
Apart from that, identity, confidence, all come from knowledge of one's roots, including language, says one of the participants.
Keeping traditions gives us confidence, self-confidence, knowing who we are. There's a saying that says you have to know where you came from to know where you're going.
There's yet another angle to all of this that we often do not talk about: architecture. What role does architecture play in safeguarding our way of life and civilization?
There are many ways that architecture responds to how people live. It plays out in our built environments through our arts and craft, our materials, our spirituality. So when we celebrate all of those things in our built environment, it preserves our identity. It's our culture. But more than that, it also provides a lot of solutions to challenges that we have in the built environment. Talk about affordable housing. Culturally, we had solved affordable housing issues. Sustainability, the right materials for keeping us cool and comfortable in our houses. Our ancestral architects had resolved that.
From consumption by moonlight, we head to an exhibition on culture and honoring our ancestral intelligence. This exposition is on another level. The idea follows the discovery of African American grave sites in New York during construction of buildings. The burial grounds were previously lost to urban development and landfill. Such occurrences had led the organizer of this exhibition to reimagine public spaces as sacred grounds for remembrance, restoration, and reparations. The central question being, how do we retain culture in the spaces that we move and create? Born and bred in the US, this Nigerian American shares with us the focal point of our work.
The exhibition is called Reparations in Public Space, and it really is a love letter to the African diaspora, and it's encouraging people to really think about spaces of healing and rest, and how do we incorporate that culturally into our environments. So how does design facilitate opportunities for us to rest, to pause, but also for us to connect to our inner African selves, to our ancestral intelligence, to the wisdom that our ancestors created and brought to us, that colonization removed, but that we need to reconnect to.
Obviously, she views customs, heritage, and beliefs from a slightly different lens, given her background.
So my perception of what it is to be Nigerian, what it is to be African, is really dynamic. I grew up in the United States, I grew up in New York, in a Nigerian enclave, and so my understanding of what Nigerian is was also very much influenced by being an immigrant in a country that is not our home. But then also coming to Nigeria and understanding what it is to be Igbo here. And so, I think it's dynamic. There are Nigerians in South America, Nigerians in the Caribbean, and the way in which our culture shows up in those places is quite different. But it all still has a remnant and similarities that really amplify their connection.
Our story is incomplete without appreciating the work of artists, some of which can be found in a gallery. So, we visited one. Upon arrival, we're greeted by a massive, intriguing bowl made from melted soda cans. The artist tries to unpack complex topics: migration, herd mentality, globalization, and more behind the concept of the bull.
This work tries to explore the herd mentality, vis-a-vis regular and irregular migration, and also when I talk about irregular migration, I'm not just talking about the physical migration of human beings, but also the migration of our minds, our mindsets. The herd mentality talks about how society, public, had always been guarded, by certain specific ideas. If you come against any of those norms, it's like, so we've been herded. The herd mentality talks about how humans have been conditioned, not to raise objective oppositions to ideas.
Throughout the gallery, we find extraordinary pieces that remind us of the beauty of handmade products that are culturally sensitive. Check out this raffia-style staircase handle, pieces of furniture, a locally designed door, kitchen cabinets, a comfortable bed covered in Ankara print, a large tree trunk saved from destruction from the outskirts of Abuja, now bearing a couple of carvings, paintings littered everywhere. Finally, this art piece covering more than half of the wall. It's made from recycled soft drink cans. What's the message here? Our consumption habits and how this affects our culture and environment.
If I go back to my village, for instance, chances are that I will get a drink from maybe Asia or somewhere, then I will get my local palm wine, And this is just some of the effects that, these things have to our culture, whereby we've so much lost the thirst to be organic.
Our culture lives when we live it. If we pass it on, it is preserved and we can take pride in it. The future begins with us. Constance Ikoku, Arise News.
Well, we're now being joined by Dr. Constance Ikoku here in the studio. Good morning, Dr. Ikoku, and thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Nkechi. I hope you had a good weekend.
Yes. What a beautiful report. What a way to start Monday. I think your report beautifully captured that tension that we see between our tradition and modernity. And I think one of the things that I found interesting is that it touched on something that we rarely discuss, the way that our environment is built, right? If you think about it, traditional Nigerian homes were built for sustainability, high ceilings, natural ventilation, and then now you have this modern way of building where we are trapping heat, jacking up electricity costs when we're supposed to be having that natural view. So I think it touched on so many different things. But I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the biggest threat when it comes to cultural preservation in Nigeria? What is that thing that is hindering us from, we're not saying we need to stay back with our traditions because the world is evolving, right? But what do you think is that thing that's hindering us sharing our stories for the young ones to understand where they come from, their identity and who they are?
Nkechi, I think you're absolutely correct when you say the world is changing. Culture also evolves over time. So definitely, whether it's now or in the future, people sort of, with time, pick what is necessary and drop those ones that are no longer serve society. However, I think the biggest problem that we see in terms of loss of culture is also the loss of self and identity. And that has major consequences for society. When you look at Nigeria, for instance, a lot of the disorganization, disorderliness, poor behavior, pollution and rot that you see today is as a result of loss of identity and loss of culture. And that fuels the total breakdown of society, and we see that every day. On the flip side, if you pivot towards embracing your cultural traditions and practices, especially the ones that are great, you will see that you begin to rejuvenate the society, or there would be a renaissance. And that's why you see some of the people in this report looking towards or contributing their widow's mite, so to speak, in order to keep our heritage alive. It is a lot of work. It is difficult because we can see that there are influences from all across the world. Talk about the influence of the media, which most times overshadows traditional practices. You're talking about globalization and westernization, where Western values and lifestyles are being promoted in front of you every single day. So it is a lot of work, but people are trying to do what they can to make sure that our heritage does not disappear completely.
Well, absolutely, and probably we might not just be going back to the pristine form in which the social, our cultural heritage and traditions existed. For instance, I know that you talked with a Ghanaian and some other Nigerians too when it comes to protecting and preserving our musical heritage, for instance. But I mean, the modern or Western influences are still very, very evident in those expressions.
Definitely. I mean, so when you listen to Tosi Salako, who was the musician who tried to merge the old and the new, you know, there is the old that we should keep. There's also the new that we should embrace and incorporate in our culture today. So it's a kind of a balance, trying to strike a balance between the two. How do you continue to grow? How do you continue to develop without losing completely what you have that is necessary? And so, for instance, we also talked about influences such as religion and how it leads to the rejection and suppression of traditional practices, of traditional spirituality, which is important to one's self-identity. We also talked about urban migration and how that changes people's lives immediately and completely because they sort of abandon rural practices. We talked about economic pressures when you come to the urban centers and even the rural areas today. People prioritize economic survival over preservation. And so these are some of the questions, some of the challenges that we deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Well, a very, very important topic. Thank you so much, Dr. Constance Ikoku, for that.